For the next 2 minutes, I'm going to attempt to simulate harsh prop conditions that are not in a race setting to test the POPO shaft. I will indicate on the screen when the prop actually did fall off, and it did fall off. So far, the HQ props have only fallen off if the button has actually gotten pushed by a flip over or a suck up against a tree or a wall or something. And that last crash did actually render my quad unusable. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But first, let's take a look at this POPO shaft and the mechanism and how it works. So this is an actual innovation brought to us by GetFPV and Lumineer, which is amazing. And right up front, I'm going to tell you I love this shaft, and it's an incredible, just incredible mechanism that it's not really unique to this particular shaft. I remember seeing it when I was a kid on keychains. So keychains actually have this similar kind of a mechanism, and I bet somebody on the GetFPV team realized that and thought maybe I could use this for the prop shaft. I bet that's where the inspiration came from for this shaft. But it's really awesome. I'm going to take a stab at how I think this prop shaft works. So the shaft is hollow. There's this button on top, there are these beads on the sides, and there's this pad on the bottom. So the shaft is hollow. The beads actually sit in a channel inside the side of the prop shaft, and the channel is less than 50% of the bead, such that when you put the beads in from the inside, they don't actually fall out, because obviously the beads aren't falling out. The button itself probably has a neck to it, it has a taper to it, and it probably has a neck on the inside, such that when you push the button down, the beads fall into the neck of the button shaft, and then they disengage. You put the prop on, and then there's a spring underneath that pushes the shaft up, and it pushes the shaft up so that the buttons engage into the prop. And then the prop can't fall off. The rubber pad down here is there to put some pressure against the bottom of the prop and push it up against the beads such that there is less wiggle room. And if you didn't have that pad underneath, you would have some wiggle room. So it gives you kind of some leeway to actually get the buttons, the beads engaged properly. So let's put a prop on and show you how it works. So the way you put a prop on is you put the prop on top, you push the button, and then you push the prop down to get over the beads, and then you have to push the prop down onto that rubber shaft and twist it until you see that button pop up. And then you wiggle it a bit to make sure the button is fully popped up, because the button does have to be fully popped up. If this button is even depressed just a hair, the prop will fall off. And the first thing people will think is, well, I can just run into another quad in a race and my prop will fall off. Which that does, I would expect that to actually happen. Because look, even if I just push the button down a little bit, just a hair, just a little bit, if I can show you how much I'm pushing it. Here, if I push down a little bit, actually never mind. This is another thing that happens, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the button is now partially engaged and I can pull the prop off. So if you push that button, it can fall off, but there's also a fix for that. So I'm going to tell you that if you're planning on getting a POPO motor, a motor with a POPO shaft, and expecting to use traditional props with it, I would not recommend you even bother with it, because using traditional props with this POPO shaft is definitely more cumbersome than the traditional shaft, and it's just a less than stellar experience. So some issues that I had with this prop shaft in its use, and I actually did put it through kind of a lot of punishment. I did gunk up the shaft quite a bit, and this is a fully cleaned out one, like it's all nice and clean and new. I did gunk it up quite a bit with tree gunk and dirt and whatnot, and the shaft does get a little finicky, so like the button sometimes doesn't pop all the way up. You have to play with it, you got to clean the beads out. And then if you look at this one has a totally different issue. In this shaft, I broke a blade and I actually flew home with this because the shaft didn't let go of the prop, but it did sort of melt the inside of the prop hub, and so the melted plastic actually stuck up against the shaft itself, and it got all gunked up, and the beads got the plastic inside of them. I actually didn't know if I was going to be able to clean up the beads and get it operational again, but after a little bit of poking around with something really, really tiny like a dental pick, I was able to get all the beads cleaned up, and the whole mechanism works fine yet again. And so let's put a prop on and show you that it works fine. And there you go, pops up just fine. Something you'll notice with this is that there is a little bit of wiggle, and that's because this motor doesn't have the pad underneath. That gunk is still there a little bit. Some of the belted plastic is still there. I still have to untwist the prop off the shaft. As you can see, there's no rubber pad underneath, and that's because in the very last crash, it actually somehow, I wouldn't even call that a crash. It was just kind of a tumble into a bush, but somehow the button got pushed, the prop fell off, and the rubber pad went with the prop. So now I kind of can't use the POPO props on this motor anymore until I get another pad. Which, another thing I'll tell you about the pad, if you're in motor tests and you're spinning up your motors just to test things, be very careful. Don't spin your motor up like 100% with that pad on, because it will stretch the pad out. And I did that to one of my pads as well, but they still work fine. You give it some time, it'll actually rebound and it works fine. But just be careful and be mindful in motor tests not to spin your motor up to 100%. Also, something else I'm going to show you is this prop, which is cracked. It has a cracked hub, and it'll actually still go over the shaft, and it will still engage, or it should engage. It engages just fine, and without the pad underneath, without putting that pressure underneath, it still grips the shaft just fine. And I did fly home just fine with this prop that had a broken hub. Actually, I didn't even feel it that much. So good news that the prop hubs actually do hold up pretty well. That being said, let's discuss the props. So now we have a couple of POPO prop options, and the two primary ones are the HQ 5.1 by 4.6 by 3 and the GemFan 5149. And unfortunately, not all POPO props are made equal, which is very unfortunate. But I'm going to try to show you if I can. So if you take a look at the GemFan prop on the left, it looks like what they did was they just took a cylinder and just punched the mold straight down, and it's just like a straight cylinder cut for the bead to sit in. When you take a close look at the way GemFan has done it, I don't know if I could show it here, maybe that's an easier way to see it. It has that same cylinder punch, but it also has a positive divot for the bead to sit inside. So when the beads actually engage, there's more plastic around the beads to grip them such that the prop will actually engage tighter. And I do feel that tightness as well. And I did lose more GemFan props off the POPO shaft than I did the HQ prop. The GemFan prop actually had the tendency to fall off relatively easily without the button even being pushed. Additionally, getting the GemFan prop on is a little bit more finicky. It's a little bit more gooey, and you can't really get the prop shaft to pop up correctly. The HQ prop just seems to have much tighter tolerances and fit the shaft better. So that's actually kind of an annoying effect, because you kind of have to wait for people to use the prop on the POPO shaft to be able to know if the prop works well. At this point, I would caution even using the gem fan. And the original gem fan prototype actually didn't work with the prop shaft at all, and they did have to improve it. So I bet they're going to improve it a little bit further still. But the fact that they have to go through revisions to get it right is kind of annoying. And maybe that's just kind of a growing pain thing, and in the future, prop manufacturers won't have a problem kind of executing the POPO channel well. But it does kind of detract from the value of the POPO shaft and the benefits of it, because it's another annoying thing that you have to think about. Lastly, I definitely need to discuss the POPO Pro shaft. Now, what the Pro shaft is the shaft without the threading on it. So the whole thing is dropped lower because you don't need all this space, and the button is actually recessed inside the prop, inside the shaft hub, so it can't get pushed. Right there, you solve a lot of the problems I was having with this shaft, and that's the main reason why I don't recommend the shaft. I recommend the POPO Pro shaft, not this particular POPO shaft, because I don't want my props to fall off if I run into a tree upside down or something. And if you're in a race and you do kind of come down on somebody, or someone comes down on you like this, you can potentially lose a prop. So not really ideal. They kind of just made this shaft the way it is right now so that people don't feel kind of not annoyed, but gives them a little bit less anxiety about picking up motors with this shaft, because they can still use traditional props on it if it doesn't work out. So what are the main benefits of the POPO shaft? Well, obviously it's a convenience factor, and it is incredibly convenient. Even after just 5 minutes of using this shaft and running into things, I was swapping props much more often because it was so easy and I didn't just bend them back. Unfortunately, that also makes it more expensive to fly, but you always have a clean set of props on which don't have vibrations and you don't have to worry about anything, which is awesome. Also, when you plug your quad into Betaflight or some other software to change some settings and whatnot, and you want to deal with your motors, I find myself actually taking my props off instead of just like throwing a towel over my quad or turning it upside down in case they spin up for whatever reason. So there's actually a safety factor as well. But what are the downsides? Well, the mechanism itself is actually more complicated. So you do have the potential of gunking up the mechanism, and it makes it a little bit wonky, and like in the field you got to play with it and get it to, kind of fiddle with it and get it to work. But then how does it compare to a traditional shaft? Well, the traditional shaft is really hard to fault, or is it? I mean, maybe we've just become really used to the faults of the traditional shaft. What are the problems with the traditional shaft? First and foremost, it's a pain to get your props on and off. Tightening the props is annoying. You slice up your fingers trying to tighten your props. If you break all your blades, you can't get the prop hub off very easily. Props come loose pretty darn easily. If you have reverse threaded motors, you got to deal with 2 different kinds of prop nuts, which are annoying to find. Maybe we're just accustomed to all those annoyances. This shaft doesn't have everything figured out, everything solved, but it has a lot of things figured out and a lot of things solved, and the convenience factor and the functionality of it is really, really good. And here's the part where it's difficult to recommend. Now, when I go flying, I usually have 3 or 4 quads with me. Even though right now I only have 1 flying quad, I usually have 3 or 4 quads with me. If something happens like this where I lose my pad and I don't have any spare pads with me, well, it's not a big deal. I'll just pull out another quad. If you're somebody that's relatively new, you only have 1 quad, and you're trying to learn and just trying to keep it cheap, this is probably not the best option for you, because it probably has just a hair more maintenance. I hope that was helpful. I hope it was informational in making your POPO shaft decisions. But let's focus on something else. So this is the HQ 5.1 by 4.6 by 3, and it's not even out yet. They haven't shipped the full batch yet. But here I have it. I'm trying to test it on the POPO shaft, and I actually like it very much. So this is the original 5.1 by 5.1 by 3, and the biggest problem with this prop was that the amp draw was rather extreme, and it was really hard to consider as a general use prop because the amp draw is so extreme. I mean, in a race, it's probably fine for a short track, but longer tracks, you really can't hold it wide open throttle. For acro, it's not as bad because we're not holding it wide open throttle for too long, but it does definitely kill your battery a little bit more. Now, enter the 4.6, and you can definitely see that the pitch is a little bit less. And these numbers, 5.1 and 4.6 pitch, I think those are relatively arbitrary. I mean, what are the chances that they made an actual 5.1 or a 4.6? They probably just named it that so that people don't get confused when they think about the 5 by 4.5. or 5x5. That's at least my guess. But either way, you can see that the 4.6 is definitely lower pitch, and it actually looks like a different blade profile a little bit. Yeah, it looks like it's a little swooped up, or maybe it's kind of an optical illusion due to the pitch. Anyways, the amp draw is absolutely less, like considerably less. The speed at the top end is also a hair less, and I can definitely tell that I don't have as much top end as the 5.1, but the control is definitely improved, kind of across the board. Now, the reason for that might be because steep pitch props or steeper pitch props tend to not work very well at low RPM, which is why I particularly like the 5.1 by 5.1. It has this kind of magical combination, which only a couple props have, where it's a super steep pitch, gives you really high speed, and it also gives you really great low speed control. Now the 4.6 has a lower pitch, and it starts generating static thrust sooner in the RPM range, whereas the 5.1 is stalling until it gets up into the higher RPM range, which is why I believe lower pitch props are generally preferred for acrobatics because of the superior low throttle control. And so I really like the 4.6. I think it's a very, very suitable replacement for the 5.1, and I think that it will eventually take over the 5.1 market entirely. I think this 5.1 will eventually go on sale and people will stop using it, similar to the 4.8. So if you like the 5.1 or if you like HQ props in general, pick up this, because I mean, I don't want to say it's the best prop. It's not the best prop. It's my preferred prop at this point in time across all the props I've tried. I think that this is one of the best props HQ has made, and I like it very much. In other news, I just want to show you this. This is the it's not a new, but it's Brain3D's GoPro mount that holds the ND filter. And this is a really cool mount because it has a little channel for the ND filter to slip into in the front here. And you could still use it without the ND filter, which was my worry, because the filter has some thickness to it, so I figured he would just kind of give it some wiggle room so that you can squeeze the two in place. But it's not. I really like this mount a lot. I just wanted to show you because I have the ND filters coming, the final version coming for testing. I actually like the look of this one better, not the colors, just the shape and look of it, because this one just kind of looks like it's cut out of a piece of plastic. But yeah, it's cool. So in other news, I kind of try to look at everything, and I was kind of surprised when I stumbled across this. This is the Racerstar 35 amp 6S 4-in-1. And the reason I'm showing you this, and the reason I have a couple of these things on the way, is that it looks like it's using really good FETs on it. And they look, at least, and they have the same numbers on it as some of the ESCs that Acon makes. And I know they use good FETs because they're some of the best ESCs that I've used. So I've talked to a couple people that have these boards, and they are all saying that they've had really positive experiences with it, and it works really well, even on 6S. It's $31 for a 6S 4-in-1 that may potentially work really well. Now, the layout looks great, and the primary issue I have with it are the little tabs on the side where the motor wire is soldered onto, but it's really not a deal breaker. I'm looking forward to testing it. It's not BLHeli32, it's only BLHeli-S. I'm really looking forward to testing it. And now I want to discuss a couple other frames. So, TransTEC. TransTEC is a company that is a Chinese company, and I've had a couple of their frames in the past, and I have to say the quality of their frames is pretty darn good. And they are also the first ones that I've seen use the carbon Kevlar mix in the arms, where two of the layers are Kevlar. And so what you're looking at here is one of their frames, or a new frame of theirs, that has the carbon Kevlar arms on it, and you might notice that it kind of looks like a mix between a floss and a rooster, so somebody called it the Flooster, and it really is exactly that. TransTEC is at least one of the Chinese companies that does switch it up a little bit. They don't just directly copy, but this is a really interesting frame because it has that kind of general mix. I don't think it's a very lightweight frame, but it's just interesting that it has all these cool components to it, and I just wanted to point that out because it's a nice frame. The next frame is also from TransTEC, and this one looks like a mix between the Mode 2 Ghost and the Floss, which is really interesting. And they are also using what they're saying is 70-75 aluminum standoffs, which is actually really cool too. TransTEC is a really interesting company. I'm not saying to buy these frames because they're unusually expensive for a Chinese company frame, but it's interesting. I wanted to point them out because they're kind of original, but not. The last frame I want to point out is the TBS Source One. Now, this is an open source frame. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that you can actually go download the files on GitHub, which is funny because it's like a physical object on GitHub, which is intended for, I'm pretty sure it's intended for software primarily. Anyways, I don't know exactly what the inspiration behind this particular project is, but I do think it's a really cool idea, and I was sort of heading towards that direction myself because I figured once China's done copying all my frames, and I am kind of sort of done with my frames because I'm pretty much happy with the designs that I have finally, so I can kind of stop and just fly and focus on other things, which I am. I was going to release the files because it's going to get cloned. People are going to start buying it for super duper cheap, even though it's low grade carbon or whatever. It's kind of the last way to battle the cloners. Like, I don't want people to fly crappy stuff, and the frames don't cost like all that much to make. And if you look at the Source One on the TBS website, they have it listed for $27. But once you add shipping and all that stuff, it comes out to around $40. But still, their listing price is around $27. So it's nice of them, and it is really the direction we should go towards. I mean, things that are really rudimentary like frames, they shouldn't be this kind of mythical creature that you have to go searching for and pay lots of money to have. It's mostly just flat carbon, and for the ones that aren't flat carbon, sure, you can charge more for those because they are kind of unique. But this is an open source frame project, which is really cool. I really hope to contribute to the open source frame project. I hope they can accept one of my designs for it because it's great. It's a great idea. Anybody can download the files. You can have them cut yourself. I don't know if it allows you to sell the frame. Maybe. I'm not sure what the GPL2 whatever, how that works for physical stuff. I don't think you can make money off selling it, or at least in a large scale you can't make money off selling it, but I think you can sell it for pretty much cost or the same price as the original person that's selling it, because it is a physical product. It does cost something to make. And yeah, that's it. So the first frame that they have is pretty darn close to an alien. It's very, very similar. And I think it's a suitable frame for the community, and it's a great starting point. So once again, huge kudos to TBS. They're mixing it up again and driving us forward in the industry. So that's it for now. Don't forget to floss your teeth. Thanks very much. Bye.